Hello and a very warm welcome to our session today. So today's session is a fireside chat, which will focus on adapting to evolving changes in workplace cultures, technology, audience taste in the world of journalism. Our guest for today's session is Ms. Shereen Bhan. So here I'll just like to open our presentation for today's session. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible.
It is.
Thank you. So, like I said, our guest for today is Ms. Shereen Bhan. So, Ms. Bhan is one of the leading journalists in the business and finance journalism space. She has over 17 years of work experience in the field of television broadcast, spanning across corporate, policy, and events that defined the business landscape in India. For over a decade, she has been producing and anchoring flagship shows like India Business Hour, What's Hot, and she's also the anchor and editor for Young Turks, one of the India's largest, longest running shows on entrepreneurs. Ms. Pan has got various accolades for her work, including the FICCI Woman of the Year by Federation of Indian Chambers and Commerce and Industry, Young Global Leader by World Economic Forum, and Best Business Anchor Award by the News Television Awards. Our moderator for today is Dr. Harsh Taneja. So Dr. Taneja is an associate professor at College of Media at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He's also the program mentor for the journalism program at Jio Institute. His research focuses on explaining audience behavior in an increasingly fragmented digital media environment. Prior to joining academia, he has worked in media and advertising at Publicis, BBC, and the Indian Express. So this session today is part of an online series called the First in Media Talk series. This is a fireside chat series with India's leading journalists organized by the journalism program of Jio Institute. A little about Jio Institute. So Jio Institute is a multidisciplinary higher education institute set up as a philanthropic initiative by Reliance Foundation and Reliance Industries. Currently, they're offering admissions in 4 full-time postgraduate programs, artificial intelligence in data science, digital media and marketing communication, sports management, and journalism. This is an aerial view of the campus. So the campus is located in Navi Mumbai, just overseeing the beautiful Arabian Sea. Our PGP, the postgraduate program in journalism, is a 1-year full-time on-campus program. We have global faculty and state-of-the-art facilities, futuristic curriculum with a study abroad module, supported by multiple industry projects and internships. We have generous scholarships and financial aid and a 360-degree career support. The applications close on 30th May 2023. As part of our industry collaborations, we have been in talks with multiple industry partners with regards to internships, capstone thesis projects, co-curricular activities like lecture series, conclaves, etc., in addition to placements. So here's a small snapshot of our industry connect. Before I begin today's today's fireside chat, I would like to point out to our audience members that they can put in their questions in the Q&A section below, and we'll take the questions towards the end of the session. And then without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Taneja to begin the session today. Over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Harshita, and thank you so much, Shereen. It is such a privilege to be able to, host you today and to have, one of the leading voices in the country and probably globally on business reporting, on journalism more broadly, come and talk to us and, educate us a little more about where we are at when it comes to the state of journalism today. And as you may be aware that, we just last week had a similar conversation with one of your colleagues, Palki Sharma. And I think what's very interesting is that both of you are, leading voices in very different but highly specialized genres of reporting. Palki's focus has always been, or for a long time, been international news. You've, of course, we all know very well, have focused on the genre of business. So I'm going to start by asking you a very, very basic question, which will, I think, help bring everybody on the same plane here. So, what exactly is business journalism? Like, why do we need a specialized genre for business reporting?
Okay, thanks very much, Harsh, for the opportunity and for giving me a chance to have this conversation. And I hope that it is of use and value to the people who do decide to tune into it. Look, when we started CNBC TV 23 years ago, this was the first business channel in the country. And the reason why we felt that there was a need for a channel that focused specifically on looking at what's happening in the business space. And I will explain what we mean by business and how that's evolved in the past 2 decades for us as a brand shortly. But that was a period when the Indian economy was opening up. We had seen the liberalization and the reforms take place. There was the start of a culture of investing in equities. The stock markets were starting to be recognized as an asset and an investment opportunity, as an asset class. And nobody was really servicing this need. There was, of course, print and print publications that were servicing some of these aspects from a consumer's point of view, but nobody on television or TV news was addressing this constituency. It was addressing this need. So there was a felt need, but it was also a need that we saw as an opportunity for us to create an ecosystem, to create a community, and to create content around that community. So that is how CNBC TV 18 began. Now, as I said, there has been for us a broadening of the way that we look at business news. When we started, and I would say that for the first decade of our existence as a business news channel, it was largely driven by the stock markets. And this was because we were based on the template of CNBC in the US. CNBC in the US was also largely catering to more the institutional investor, less the retail investor. But here in India, our focus was much more on the retail investor. And of course, we were also catering to the institutional audience and the institutional investor. So for the first 10 years, it was very sharply and squarely focused on the stock markets, investments, corporate balance sheets, companies, their earnings. In fact, before CNBC TV 18 came around, people didn't actually have access to quarterly results. There was no such thing as a quarterly result conversation that happened between managements as well as their shareholders, which is what we decided to do here on CNBC TV 18. And that is how this quarter tak phenomena has taken shape as well. So in many ways, we've defined this genre, we've grown this genre. And because we've been the leaders in this space, it's also been incumbent on us to evolve the way that people relate and engage with business news. So for instance, and this is not just symbolism, it's real and actual in the way that we have shaped our content strategy in the last decade or so. So for the first 10 years, as I said, if CNBC's DNA and promise was profit from it, we are today a destination for credible, actionable information. And that tells you how we've evolved, and that tells you how we've changed the way that we look at business news, and also our audience engages with us when it comes to the business news genre. When the markets are trading, which is essentially between 7 and 4 p.m., we are largely focused on that. We're largely focused on earnings. We're largely focused on any corporate or policy development and news that takes place that impacts not just the economy, but could impact individual shareholders and so on and so forth. But post 4 p.m., we address a whole bunch of other needs. Business does not operate in a political vacuum, and hence I don't see why, as a business news brand, we should not be in the space of looking at what is happening in the political economy. But we look at it from a different lens, but we do engage with the political economy. I don't see why, as a business news channel, we should not be looking at reforms that impact you and me as a consumer, as a citizen. Why should we not look at education? Why should we not look at healthcare? Why should we not look at gender parity? And my point is very simple and clear, and this is our sort of abiding principle in the newsroom as well, that whatever matters to India and her people, her society, her economy, her balance sheet is what should matter to us as well as far as our content strategy is concerned. So I'm very proud of the fact that today CNBC TV 18 recognized 20 years ago that, that there was something interesting going on with first generation entrepreneurs starting to experiment with the idea of creating enterprise. And that gave shape and birth to what is today the world's longest running show on startups and entrepreneurship called Young Turks. We got into a show called What's Ailing Rural India. Every time, and I see this very transactional approach to news and events. So for instance, every time there is a crisis of a weather calamity of some sort, people will talk about agriculture, people will talk about the plight of the farmer. And then when that event is over, you move on and you forget about it. And it's almost as if it never happened. So we have tried to be consistent in our reportage as well, and consistent in our approach to the things that matter to us as a country. So we started a program called What's Ailing Rural India, which was really our attempt at going into the length and breadth of the country to understand what is shaping the rural economy, what matters to people in the rural economy. When we talk about the rural economy, what are we talking about? Now it's become very fancy and sexy to talk about Bharat and so on and so forth. But 10 years ago, that was not the conversation that people were having. And, again, I want to emphasize that, these buzzwords are bandied about very loosely, but our attempt has really been to understand what goes behind that, what really is changing, if at all. So that has been the evolution of content for us at CNBC TV 18. And I would say, because we are the leaders today, we're a 90% share of the business news genre, that we have shaped the way that people look at business news. We've also shaped the way that people engage with business news. So in a nutshell, that is why I think that business news has an important, very relevant role to play. And I think it's meaningful. I think it's instructive. I think it can offer a prescription in terms of what needs to be done, what is working, what is not working. And for all of those reasons, I believe that we do require very robust and business news channels or business news brands to occupy space, mind space here in the country, as they do globally as well.
I think that's really a great answer and a very comprehensive answer. It actually already answers a lot of the follow-up questions that I had, but I'll still push a little more. So actually news in general and business news in particular has often been accused of being very, what a scholar of journalism, a sociologist at Columbia University who's been studying news and newsmaking since the 70s, Herbert Gans, said, that news is very mono-perspectival. And what he specifically means is that all news is essentially dominated by giving a voice to a few authoritative sources. When it comes to politics, it's a few elite voices in the government. Mm-hmm. And similarly, for business news, I think Gans specifically critiques business news for being obsessively focused on the stock market. And although you just explained that, how the 2 decades of CNBC TV 18 have been very different. But I think if I was to, for example, run a poll among all our attendees or in any room and ask people, what is the one word that comes to your mind when it comes to business news or CNBC? People will say either stock market or tips, investing tips, or, investments. So, but I think what Gans was trying to tell us was that, poor people need the business news like everyone else, and not about investing or about latest newsworthy acts, whether legal or illegal, by companies. Poor people need to know about where they can afford to shop, where they can get jobs. If they are unemployed, how can they get help? Just to give a few examples. So do you think, how would you respond to Gans, since I'm, really relaying his critique of business news, which I partly believe.
Uh, so there is valid criticism in that argument and in that thesis, and I would be naive to suggest that that is something that can be dismissed. But as I explained to you, and I would like to sort of give examples to you to further the case that I've been making, which is that I am sensitive to the fact that you know television news, and forget business or otherwise, often tends to be driven by a certain class of people. I mean, in our case, of course, English speaking, because that is the medium that we operate in. So, of course, it will be English speaking, but it also tends to be a certain privileged elite class that is seen and heard. I'm mindful of that. I'm also conscious of the fact that we need a diversity of opinion. I'm also mindful of the fact that we need a diversity of issues that we need to confront ourselves with. And so, as I explained, I gave you one example, for instance, of the series that we continue to do called "What's Ailing Rural India." Now, and very often I get asked this question: why is a business news channel like yours worried about what is happening to apple farmers in Himachal Pradesh? Why is your reporter being sent to go to Himachal Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh and do a series on what's happening as far as the wheat produce is concerned? And why have prices crashed? But this, I believe, is important. And to your point, that look, there cannot be an elite capture of issues. There cannot be an elite capture of voices. And we have tried to bring in that diversity, not just of opinion, but also of issues. I'll give you another example. Today, people are talking about what has happened on account of the WHO warning on cough syrups. But this is, for us as a news brand, this is not new, because we've actually been focusing on the issue of substandard medicine, of sub-quality medicine in this country for the past 7-8 years. We started a program called Bad Medicine, exactly with this intention that on one hand, we have the aspiration to not just be the pharmacy of the world, but move up the value chain as far as the pharma industry is concerned. On the other hand, we also have this big problem, this big challenge of spurious drugs, of subquality drugs that remains unaddressed. And so we have gone after that. And we've gone after that painstakingly year after year, several years now. So that's another example that I was giving you. A very recent example, which has now been around for about 5 years, is an example of a show that we run called Changing India. And to your point, I believe that it is our job to highlight what is not working, but it's equally our job to highlight what is working. What are the government schemes on the ground that you can avail of? What are the government schemes that are working? What is with the NRE? What is wrong with the NREGS? Through our show called Changing India, for instance, we are looking at some of these aspects. How has the Mudra scheme worked, which is the scheme that the government brought in to try and encourage entrepreneurship in across not just small medium enterprises, but for individual entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. What is working? What's not working? So I think that one has to, in the newsroom, be conscious of the fact that you run the risk of commoditization. And if you look across your television screens today in India, and I would also say that perhaps even large parts of the world, you will see this commoditization. It's the same set of people speaking to you. It's the same set of issues that are being discussed. And it is the same sort of treatment of narrative that we are seeing. So we need to be mindful of the fact that there is a commoditization of news that is taking place. We need to be alive and alert to the risk of that commoditization. And I think that is the job of us as editors. If we abdicate that role and responsibility and say, look, whatever's trending on Twitter is going to be my top story for the day, I think we are selling ourselves short, and we are not going to be relevant to our consuming audience. And again, I keep seeing people say this: oh, people are tuning out of the news. People are tuning out of the news. Why are people tuning out of the news? People are tuning out of the news because you're no longer relevant to them. It's not about the fact that they're tuning out of television screens and moving to a mobile phone or a laptop or whatever the case may be. They are getting out of what is irrelevant content to them. So I think we need to become relevant to the consumer that we're trying to address. We need to understand who the consumer is that we're trying to address. I mean, any brand, forget a news brand. I mean, this is marketing 101. You need to understand who who you're talking to and why you're talking to them, and that defines your brand promise and your brand purpose. So as I said, we need to be mindful of ensuring that there isn't an elite capture, and we need to ensure that there is a diversity of opinion and diversity of issues. And this is as brand custodians, as editors, as people in the newsroom, this is our job. There is there is um, what keeps me up at night is not competition. What keeps me up at night is the paranoia of not being relevant to my consumer. And I think that is what continues to drive us with what we're doing, with the kind of innovations we're making, or the kind of changes we're bringing about, or the kinds of issues that we're trying to address.
No, I think that's, again, a great answer. And, thank you for acknowledging that you do partly take the criticism, and also addressing issues like, news avoidance. So we academics have fancy terms for everything. So, the phenomenon of people tuning out of the news that you just talked about, me and my doctoral students and a lot of other colleagues who I do research on news audiences with, we all call it news avoidance, but it is a big problem around the world. And, I think journalists and academics need to work together on how can we actually continue to get people interested in the news. So, I think we'll have one more aspect about business journalism as a genre that I wanted to touch on before we move to other topics. That I think, particularly in doing business journalism, many feel that you are always walking a tightrope between becoming a PR outlet or a public relations outlet for corporates versus actually reporting news and what's newsworthy. So it would be great to hear your comments on how you balance this and what you essentially see as public relations for companies, and what do you see as business? How do you differentiate?
I'm very clear. Any kind of information that comes to us has to be treated as a claim, right? I mean, you will have companies coming and saying, oh, this is, sales numbers and so on and so forth. Fortunately for us, in the case of listed entities, there is data available. So it is our job. And that is where diligence comes in, and that's where the robustness of the processes that you follow come in. That you need to have people who have the specialization, who have the skill to be able to look at the balance sheet, to be able to look at the P&L and say, hey, does this claim bear out in reality? And so I think that is a very, very important practice. That's a very important principle that we have to ensure that stays robust. There is absolutely no scope for any compromise there. So as I said, you have to treat everything that a company tells you as a claim till the time that you can verify or substantiate that by way of facts. And facts in listed companies' cases are available. And of course, there will sometimes be the case where you may miss something, but that's just how it is. But you have to ensure that you actually have SOPs in place to look at the claims and verify them, and you have those practices in place. Look, it's not to use to quote back the word that you use, that it often is that, or the perception is that you end up being a mouthpiece. I think it is your approach to being able to address the news, how you address it, the way that you address it. And I don't believe that, just because you're screaming or shouting or talking down to somebody, that necessarily suggests that you're doing your job. I think there are, whether, it's the presentation style, but more importantly, it is how much emphasis you put into verifying facts, how much emphasis you put into providing context and perspective. Very often you'll get press releases which say, oh, record sales and so on and so forth. But our job is to put context and perspective. Record sales for what period? Record sales against what number? Record sales against what the competition says? Record sales against what parameter, what metric? So I think context and perspective, those are important. And that is our job to add and provide as journalists to ensure that you're not doing public relations and you're actually doing a story and you're doing journalism. So I think those are critical things. And at the end of the day, asking questions. I mean, wherever you do get access, ask questions. Very often people respond, and very often people don't. And so you're left with whatever you are left with in terms of access to public information. So and then to be honest about that, saying that, look, we don't. I think one of the things that is critical, and I keep telling our reporters and producers in the newsroom, is that we don't have all of the answers, and we need to have the humility, and we need to have we need to be grounded enough to understand that we don't have all the answers. Neither are we sitting in judgment on people. So it is in our best interest, and it serves the best interest of our consumers and our viewers if we go about trying to get to the best information available, get to the best answers available in the right way. So, write questionnaires, send out a detailed questionnaire. Companies will choose to respond, may choose to ignore you, but at least you have done your part in being able to get the right information, get the verified information that is necessary. So I think it is the process that you follow that distinguishes how you approach a story, whether it's claims and PR or it is actual journalism. And I think that continues to drive us today. I mean, look, we've been around 23 years. If we weren't providing credible information, if we weren't standing up for transparency, and if we weren't standing up for good quality journalism, I don't believe that we would continue to have the kind of dominance that we enjoy, the respect and the credibility that we enjoy. And remember, today, it's all in real time. People are watching you and me in real time, or have the freedom and the ability to pick up their mobile phones and their laptops and post on Twitter and social media and say what they wanted to say about what they thought of your show or what they thought of your story and how you approached it. So you have to be very, very mindful of this. There's really no room for error. There's very little room for error, and so we have to ensure that we have robust practices in place to ensure that claims are backed up by data, by diligence.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's a great segue to what would have been my next question. It's a really, really broad question to begin with, and we can address multiple aspects of it. But broadly, like in the scope of business journalism, how would you say has the internet, disrupted, if I may use the word, or changed journalism, or is changing journalism?
I think it's not just business news, but I think it's news in general. I think there has been a democratization, and we can debate and argue about the perils as well as the possibilities of that, but that's a democratization. I mean, today when I look at my landscape, I don't compare myself to the 4 or 5 Indian business news brands. I mean, I'm going to have to take cognizance of what a Wall Street Journal is doing. I'm going to have to be alive and sensitive to what a Financial Times is doing. I'm going to have to watch what a New York Times is doing, because as far as the consumer is concerned, they don't care whether you're an Indian brand or you're a television brand or whatever. They care about the fact that, look, if I can watch you on TV or I can get you on my mobile phone, who is giving me the best content, who's giving me the most relevant content, who's giving me actionable insights, who's giving me value added perspective. So you have to redefine the landscape that you're operating in, who you are up against, which also means that you have to be very sure of the audience that you're going after. And that will in many ways define your content strategy. You've also got to be alive to the possibility that, look, you are now living in a non-linear world. People are not going to wait for 9 o'clock to be able to watch the news. It is very literally 24/7. So how do you operate in that 24/7 environment? How do you staff for a 24/7 environment? How do you resource for a 24/7 environment? This aspect of just consumption patterns changing and people moving from television to the mobile phone is just one aspect. That's the distribution end that's changing. But what do you do to ensure that there is alignment within newsrooms to also stream content across these different platforms, and each platform now, and that's both an opportunity and a challenge, but it's also an interesting sort of learning curve for many of us who've grown up with TV news. Um, it is changing the rules of the game in terms of the way that content is presented. So we've grown up in an era of 30-minute shows, 60-minute shows. Today, it's our 2-minute, I'm told by our analytics teams that our 3-minute videos are the ones that are, doing the best. So how do you now get the skills in place to put together what used to be a 30-minute program and condense it into a 3-minute short video, and make it still informative but appealing to the audience, because that's clearly the time format that they're more comfortable with. So I think it's also it's, as I said, it's challenging, but it's also a learning curve for many of us to reimagine work processes, to reimagine workflow, to reimagine teams, and the way that we do things, to reimagine formats, to reimagine presentation styles. I think it's opened up a whole different world, and I don't believe that everybody or anybody at this point in time has mastered this transition. I think everyone is grappling and coping with what works. A lot of it is trial and error. And that's also the beauty of it, because you're getting feedback in real time. That's also, so you can start small, fail small, and look at what's working and what's not. So it's I would say that it's an interesting time, and it's an interesting transition for many of us in the news business. It's clearly disruptive, but I think we're obsessing too much about the distribution side and not enough on how do you actually ensure that you're producing content that's relevant for these different platforms.
Perfect. So actually that brings me to the next question that I had, that yes, for example, you talked about how, people who are interested in business news or consumers of business news no longer need to be limited to content that's only from India. They have on their phones, let's say, access to the Wall Street Journal, for example, or Financial Times. But what about sort of the less formal news sources? So, if you think of it, there are so many financial influencers on social media, and some of them are remarkably popular. They are on YouTube. There are Telegram channels, there are Slack communities. I think Capital Mind, for example, comes to mind as another such, community of investors in India. So and since you talked about, content, like needing to do enough on the content side. So how do you sort of juxtapose what CNBC TV 18 or a formal business reporting organization, a legacy business reporting organization does with all these different sources of content, some of which are really relevant?
Yeah, so I think that is something that that has created an opportunity, but I think it's also created a challenge, which even the regulator is now looking at. So this whole universe of financial influencers that has opened up, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that, look, and I think there have been recent cases where, stock advice and so on and so forth through Telegram channels and so on and so forth, the market regulator has come down on those. At the end of the day, we're a brand, we're a legacy brand, but we're not a brand that is disconnected with the needs of our audience. But we're also a brand that's mindful of the fact that, look, I cannot be a financial influencer and give stock advice and stock tips and stock recommendations. That is not my mandate. It is not the mandate of my journalists or CNBC researchers or CNBC analysts to give out stock advice. We're not allowed to do that. And so that's just the rules of our engagement, and that's the rules of our game, and we have to play by that. Now, how do we play within those and still make it engaging and exciting? We will get the best guests. we will get the best SEBI certified guests. We will get the best guests who have a certain credibility and a certain track record. And because at the end of the day, look, people associate us with trust and credibility. And we don't want to be in a situation where people say, look, it's not as if any, this advice given by people on the channel may not go wrong or may not. I mean, that's just the nature of the markets, right? I mean, that's how it is. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the people who appear on the channel, the people who engage with us are people who have their credentials in place, who have been certified by the regulator, by the exchanges, etc., to be able to give out that information. That can be presented in a fashion that is more appealing to a younger audience. And we did that I'll give you an example, through the course of the pandemic, and when everybody was, in work from home, and there was just this sense of general sort of, life coming to an end. And I said, look, we need to re-energize, we need to reaffirm our commitment to our brand purpose, which was to provide actionable information. And that was also, it coincided with the time that we saw a lot of new investors coming into the market because people were sitting at home, people were watching television, people had access to trading platforms and so on and so forth. So we created a whole line of new programming through the course of the pandemic to address this new investor, to do a market 101 and break it down, like what does it mean to be in the stock markets? What should you be mindful of? What should you look at? And so I think we have to find ways of being able to engage with the audience in a way that makes sense to them, but in a way that's also appealing to a Gen Z and a Gen M audience. And that is a large part of what we're trying to do, just in terms of presentation and format and so on and so forth. But we have to be mindful of the fact that, look, we have a responsibility, we have a legacy. People depend on us, people trust on us to provide them verified information, and we take that seriously. We do not take that granted. We don't take our leadership for granted, and we don't take our viewers' time for granted either. So within this universe of financial influencers and so on and so forth, we have to ensure that we do what is right by us as a news brand, and we do what is right by our consumer and our audience.
Perfect. So I think, related to that, I had a very specific question. Since COVID in particular, we've heard of this term called, meme stocks, at least in the Western context. Maybe it's not a very prevalent thing in India, but basically this whole idea that, the collective sentiment of an online community. In this case, one of the most famous communities is on this forum called Reddit, called Wall Street Bets, where discussions and sentiment within a community can propel stocks to, see very, very high valuations, which don't simply reflect the fundamentals of those companies. So, just for the viewers, I'll give a little more context before I turn to my question for you, is that, we saw two companies in particular, GameStop, which is really, 1980s, 1990s style gaming arcades, a business that's not very popular or viable anymore, or AMC Theaters, which is a traditional multiplex chain here in the US. These two stocks, which were really getting hammered, these companies were getting hammered during COVID. And this online community, a few influencers just decided that these stocks were valued too low. And this community was able to basically get them to, very, very high valuations. And this caused a lot of turbulence among more formal investors, including hedge funds. So what do you think is this? And to, continue further, now we actually even have an exchange traded fund, an ETF called Roundhill Investments, which basically invests in the top 25 meme stocks based on social media sentiment. So how do you think is the growing influence of these informal circuits of business information exchange or business journalism affecting the genre of, proper, credible, formal business journalism that you and your outlet engage?
So, let me address this and I have to say that the level of misinformation, disinformation, rumors, and so on and so forth has gone up exponentially. I would say a large part of our working day is spent, ensuring that whatever comes on WhatsApp is, which many people assume to be the gospel truth, is not. And very often it is actually the opposite of what it is claiming to be. And so a large part of our working day is spent verifying these sources of information. And again, something that has driven us, in our newsroom, I'm always very mindful of the fact that while we should attempt to get it first, always, but never at the cost of getting it right. So what drives us is we need to be accurate first. And if speed is going to be a casualty of that, then so be it. But we're not going to compromise on quality. Yes, mistakes happen. As long as they're honest mistakes, that's fine. But we have to ensure that we verify every piece of information that goes out. And I'm saying that today, especially because of social media and deep fakes and so on and so forth, you have to be really, really careful. Very often, you will see on Twitter, it might look like a, company's letterhead and so on and so forth. But now now we don't take, I've made it very clear, just don't take anything at face value. Don't take anything for granted. Even if you see a logo and a company's sort of press release with the logo being put out on Twitter, please first make sure, double check, is that up on the exchanges? Reach out to the company and check, hey, did you actually issue this press release or not? Because you really don't know. There are vested interests, there are motivated interests, especially when it comes to, moving the markets and so on and so forth. So you have to be very, very careful of where you're getting your information from, but also verifying every piece of information that is coming to you. And I think what we also need to recognize is that even when it comes to picking up information which is not firsthand, sources of information from either your own news network, etc., but from somebody else, I'm very clear about the fact that only stick with the news agencies that have a track record and credibility, and attribute it, and also then say that, look, we have not been yet. Only if it's meaningful, if it's a meaningful piece of information that deserves some attention, warrants attention, attributed to whoever that news agency is, Reuters, AFP, whatever the case may be. I'm talking about the large agencies, but also don't leave it at that. Then try and see if you can independently verify that piece of information or that story. So do your due diligence and your checks, but especially when it comes to markets, and especially when the markets are trading. I mean, any rumor can move and create volatility up or down as far as the stock is concerned. And so we have to be very, very careful of the consequence of our words, the consequence of our actions, the consequence of the information that we put out, which is why, as I said, speed, great, but never at the cost of quality, and never at the cost of diligence.
But let's take this problem one step further. So you've talked about what we should and what you are doing as a newsroom. But in your opinion, how do we educate the public to be able to better discern and better recognize credible sources and information from, WhatsApp University memes, for example?
I don't want to sound sort of condescending or arrogant or any of that, but at the end of the day, people will make their choices. I mean, you can only go out there and say, look, this is why we believe that this is not credible information. We can only put out the information that we believe to be true, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if somebody decides to go with what a financial influencer or anybody else or whatever else source they believe to be true, well, then that is the choice that they're making. There's nothing that you and I can do about that. What we can do is to create enough awareness, is to make it easier for people to be able to access us, is to be is to put out information in a way that is de-jargonized, etc., to make it accessible to a lay person. I mean, those are things that we can do. That is what is in my control. Now, what you choose to do, whether you choose to exercise the remote control one way or the other, or your mobile phone one way or the other, I have no control on that. I can only ensure that I put out the best version of my product on a daily basis. I address your needs in a way that satisfy you, that are relevant to you and give you the best user experience possible. But after that, if you choose to exercise the remote control or your mobile phone or your mouse, well, then that's really on you, and there's nothing that you and I can do about
Perfect. And I must acknowledge one of the audience members, Sakshi Bhalla, who's also my doctoral student, for pushing me to talk about the whole meme stock question and get your perspective. So thank you, Sakshi. And so now, when we are talking about internet technology and journalism today, we have to talk about AI, or artificial intelligence. And I think in the specific context of business journalism, which a big part of which is still about people turning to information to make better financial and investment decisions, if AI can potentially trade as well, if not better, than humans, and we've actually had algorithmic trading in some form with just plain machine learning even before artificial intelligence became so mainstream. So what does and this, what a lot of proponents argue, takes sort of the element of human emotion out of the process. So what does it mean for storytellers in this space?
As you rightly pointed out, algorithms are in place. I think platforms like Zerodha and Upstocks and so on and so forth have also brought in new way of consumers engaging with the stock markets and stock market investing and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that AI will bring in its own share of disruption. We haven't seen it play itself out yet, and I'm sure that it will eventually over the course of time. And there's no point really second guessing the impact of that just yet. But what is it that we can do to ensure that our storytelling continues to be robust? What is it that we can do to ensure that our content continues to be interesting and engaging for people? I mean, that is all that I can control. And to be fair, at this point in time, I don't think that, while you can have sort of gimmicky AI anchors and so on and so forth, but I don't think that newsrooms today have truly understood how to use these AI tools in a meaningful way. I think everyone's still grappling with how do you use ChatGPT or whatever else is the next best AI tool, and what is it going to mean in terms of skills and skills development and rewiring and retooling of manpower. I think these are questions that are largely unanswered. At least they're unanswered for me at this point in time. I'm being honest about that, and I think we need to be able to find an execution roadmap of how we are going to learn to live with this. And I think there is something to be said about storytelling, and I'll give you an example of a show that we're currently working on, or a series of shows that that excite me, that we're working on, where the power of storytelling is not something that in that way AI can necessarily take away. We've just had our reporter come away from traveling through villages of Punjab, capturing the stories of young kids, young girls between 6 and 13, who are now all training to be the next Harmanpreet Kaur and Smriti Mandana's and Mithali Raj. And, because we've seen now with the WPL and with women's cricket take off, that there is now this aspiration in small town India to say, look, this is something that we would like to see our daughters be able to do. And so that's powerful storytelling. It's also powerful storytelling for us to be able to, and I'm saying that here's another example where we are using the power of technology. It's a show of ours called Mad About Markets, where we are completely in an AI set. And everything, all the graphics are AR, VR. And so, we are making use of technology and the way that we present this show. But again, it's a deep dive every week into a sector, from aviation, AI itself. What are the implications? What are the opportunities? So I think the power of storytelling continues uh, to sort of drive content. And I don't think that that will be tempered by technology. I think technology can be used to embellish. It can be used to stylize. It can be used to better present. It can be used to better research. It can be used to, get more better data on the table. But I think the power of storytelling and being able to put a show together, being able to put a story together, is still something that human beings, at least at this point in time, have the ability to control.
No, actually, a fun anecdote. So, I just for kicks before this session tried, to really massage Chat GPT into generating 20 questions that I should ask Shereen Bhan.
And
And
you get
I
an
tell you that the output was so textbookish. And I was like, this is like a very average student assignment that someone would,
because
have done.
that's where they're getting it from, right? They're picking it up from all
Correct.
the
Absolutely. So I do think that, the questions that I was able to work on my own were remarkably better. But yeah, so, related to this, but in general, do you see in terms of workflows, we know that news as a genre is undergoing a major financial struggle, as audiences are changing their behavior, as distribution mechanisms are changing, advertising dollars are not readjusting in the same way. But then do you see AI as an opportunity for newsrooms to somehow, get their financial practices more efficient? I mean, sorry, their, HR practices more efficient, their workforce more organized, and help them tide over this financial crisis?
So I think there are two things. I think technology can play a part in streamlining operations. I think technology can play a part in cost optimization and efficiency. I think technology can play a part in actually also opening up new revenue streams. So, for instance, forget the efficiency argument, which is largely where a lot of the focus is. But for us as a brand, for instance, YouTube is now suddenly opened up as an opportunity where we can program differently, we can strategize differently, we can address a different audience, and that is a monetizable opportunity. There is the Facebook opportunity, there's the Instagram opportunity, there is now, of course, if Elon Musk has his way, the Twitter opportunity as well. So I think we also need to look at technology not only from a cost optimization and efficiency point of view, but also the way that we can utilize it from a monetization perspective. So I think that's where the excitement is. That's also where the transition is taking place. And I think everyone is trying to figure out where you want to be and how you want to utilize that. But I certainly think that we need to now start thinking much more. I keep telling our newsroom that we need to start thinking out of the box, quite literally, because we are no longer a TV news brand. We are a news brand. Consumed on television, consumed on Facebook, consumed on YouTube, consumed on Twitter, consumed on Instagram, on your mobile phone, or wherever else the consumer wants. So how do we design strategies that are relevant for each of these platforms? How do we design monetization, content strategies and monetization strategies for each of these platforms? I think that's again something that we are going to have to come to terms with. Look, you have to acknowledge this is reality. The reshaping has taken place. There is no point pretending like it has not. So what do you do? How do you ensure that you actually benefit from it? What will be your core strength? What will you focus on what will you prioritize, what will you deprioritize, where do you resource, where do you take away resources from? I think these are the questions, and some of them are existential questions as well, that editors and owners and promoters and managers are going to have to deal with. But I certainly think that technology should not be seen only from an efficiency perspective or a workforce perspective, but should also be seen as from an opportunity perspective, a revenue mobilization perspective, and especially as an auxiliary ancillary revenue mobilization perspective as well.
Absolutely. So, that brings me to the sort of last theme that I wanted to touch on today. And since we are, yet to start this program, a lot of attendees here are people who are actively considering, studying journalism and a career in journalism. So, keeping this partially as advice for budding journalists in mind, would Shereen Bhan characterize these turbulent times as moments of, opportunities or crisis for business journalism?
I would say that if we don't course correct, we will be in a deeper crisis. I think if we don't recognize that change needs to happen, changes need to be made, I think we will be in a crisis. And I think if we don't recognize the need to look out of the box, quite literally, again, as I go back to that, I think we will be in a crisis. And let me address that, from the way that I see it. I think everyone who is in the business today needs to go back and address the very first question. Who is your audience? Who is your consumer? Who is your reader? Who is your viewer? What are you servicing? What need of that consumer are you servicing? We're talking today about hyper-local food delivery. Why are we not talking about hyper-local news delivery, for instance? There are so many examples that I can give, but I think that for us to be able to save ourselves out of this crisis, we need to first introspect and acknowledge where things have gone wrong. I think we also need to acknowledge the fact that if we don't make changes, and if we don't make changes fast enough, we are going to be in a deeper crisis. And again, I feel today news in India is being driven not by the consumer, but is being driven by what you think your competitor is doing, or so-called competitor is doing. And this commoditization that we have seen taking place, a commoditization of views, a commoditization of issues, a commoditization of narratives, I think that is the biggest disservice that we have done to ourselves. And I think if we don't recognize that, and I think if we don't course correct, then I truly believe that we are in trouble. And I think if we don't see technology as an opportunity and learn to use technology as an advantage, I think we will be in trouble. I think I see it. It is no doubt a challenging time, but I think it is also a time for credible news brands, and I choose those words very carefully, but credible news brands to take the lead, to define what the business in this country is going to look like over the next 20 to 30 years.
Perfect. So I think, I just realized that we are past the hour. So, it looks like we've only been talking for 10 minutes, but we've had you for an hour, and we recognize that, we should respect your time as also of all the other audience members. And I think in taking these questions, I've broadly addressed a lot of the open questions that our audiences have posted in the chat. So I think I would like to, thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us, for very patiently answering my half-baked questions. And, I would request Harshita to come back on and lead us the rest of the way. Thank you so much, Shereen, and thank you so
Harsh.
much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad that I was chatting with you and not Chat GPT.
Absolutely.
Thanks a million, and I do hope that this was of use and value to the listeners and to the students or whoever else has decided to tune in this evening.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Shereen, for taking out time for the session today and sharing such intricate details about the entire process and what all steps that are taken up when developing the news story. I'm sure the insights shared by you were found valuable by our audience members. I would also like to thank Harsh for moderating the session today in an engaging and effective manner and for bringing your scholarly inputs in today's conversation. So before we close, I would again like to add that Jio Institute is launching a postgraduate program in journalism this year, and the admissions for this program are still open. You can check out on our website, www.jioinstitute.edu.in, and get the details from there. Coming up next, so we have another session planned, and coming up next in our series of First in Media Talk is another talk, which is with a political journalist. So this is Miss Maria Shakil, and we plan to have it next week. You will soon see details on our social media very soon. So do tune in if this area also interests you. And with that, I would like to close today's session. Thank you everyone for joining in, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Harsh.